Welcome to the Elixir Sessions, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness and innovation. In today's session, we're honored to welcome Dr. Aubrey de Grey, a true pioneer in biomedical gerontology. Dr. de Grey is on a mission to combat aging and aging-related diseases. Through his leadership in organizations like the Methuselah Foundation and the SENS Research Foundation, he's advancing science to help humanity live healthier and longer lives. Dr. de Grey, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for taking the time to share your groundbreaking work on longevity with us. How do you personally define longevity?
The word longevity has become a bit of a catch-all that means different things to different people, and that's good and bad because it means different things, right? I don't really use the word longevity. I like to emphasize that I don't work on longevity. I work on health. Longevity is a side effect of health. In other words, the longer you stay healthy, the longer you're likely to live. That used not to be the case. Historically, people used to be eaten by tigers or they would die of tuberculosis at the age of 3 or whatever, right? But these days, even in the developing world, the number one causes of death are things that do not generally affect young adults. They only affect older adults. And of course, that's abundantly true in the industrialized world. Literally 90% of the medical budget of the Western world goes on the health problems of late life. So my definition of longevity is simply longevity is a side effect of health.
What's your go-to recipe for living a healthier life?
So the reason I work to do this in the context of a non-profit is because there are a lot of things that we need to do if we really want to keep people healthy when they get old that we can't currently do. That are the domain of research. And in fact, further than that, the domain of early stage research that investors would not be attracted by. They are genuinely pre-investable. And that's going to be true for a little while yet. I am a PhD, not an MD. In other words, I'm not legally allowed to give medical advice, but more than that, that's not my area of expertise. I'm not focused on what we can do today. I'm focused on what we will be able to do in the future and to bring that future to be the reality sooner rather than later. But more than that, I will say that at the moment we can't do very much. We kind of knew that, right? Life expectancy has risen over the past 60 years, since World War II or whatever, at a steady rate. Except for the past few years, what with COVID and everything, and also the obesity epidemic. But it's like slow. It's really slow. And the reason it's slow is because we basically don't know what we're doing. We actually do not have the tools yet. So we need much better tools. Worse than that, even if we look at what we can do today, what little things we can do today, it's different things for different people because it involves optimizing one's metabolism, basically. And people's metabolism starts out different because of genetic differences, epigenetic differences, So there's no lowest common denominator, there's no general rule. The only thing that one can say that's general is pay attention to your body. In other words, do what seems to work for you. There are lots of things that people could do that they don't do just because they are resigned to them for no reason. The one I often highlight these days is gluten intolerance, which is a very prevalent phenomenon, right? And, masses of people discover that they're gluten intolerant in middle age. They've lived with it for decades, right? And the only reason they have is because they never thought about it, right? So I certainly think it makes some kind of sense for everybody to just, go on a gluten-free diet for a week and just see what happens. Just see what you feel. So simple, right? If they feel better, that means they were gluten intolerant, so they can stay that way. If they feel exactly the same, then it means they're not gluten intolerant and they can go back to eating what the hell they like, right?
What's your ideal vision for the future of health and longevity?
I think, still pretty much unique among experts in the biology of aging, in that I actually do answer time frame questions. Most of my colleagues, in fact, pretty much all of my other colleagues, it's just beginning to change, will run away very fast when you ask them a question about time frames. Because there is such a deep, visceral hatred of the risk of getting people's hopes up, of overpromising and under-delivering, right? I say that makes sense in most situations in science, but in this case, it does not make sense, because we're talking here about something that has enormous implications for human suffering, and it's something that humanity has already decided that it's fatalist about. So if we don't give predictions, people are going to default to their prior predictions, which is never. We're never going to do anything about aging, right? Which is bollocks, right? So I go out and say, but of course, one does have to recognize that this is pioneering technology, and therefore there's no way we can make accurate predictions. So my predictions are always probabilistic, right? So I say that we have a 50-50 chance of getting to such and such a milestone by such and such a point. The milestone that I talk about the most is something that I've called longevity escape velocity, which is essentially the point where we haven't completely brought aging under control, but we've got close enough to it that we are staying one step ahead of the problem, that we are essentially improving our anti-aging medicine faster than time is passing, so that the same people can continue to be retreated and re-rejuvenated. And I believe that the 50-50 time frame for that, as of now, is 12 to 15 years from now. So in other words, the latter part of the 2030s.
When the time comes for rejuvenation, what will that process actually look like?
A lot of people recognize that aging is a very complex phenomenon, and therefore, in some sense, very different from individual diseases like infections. And they extrapolate from that to the idea that the treatment for it will also be very different. But that's not actually the case. I like to give the example of the MMR vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella, right? It's not one vaccine, it's 3 vaccines that happen to be provided in one injection. That's going to be more or less the way things are going to go. I can totally see a scenario 15 years from now when we're giving 300 things in one injection, right? So it's going to, from the point of view of the recipient, right, it's going to be just like any other medicine we have today.
How does longevity medicine intersect with psychedelics in your view?
The main thing we can say today about the relationship between psychedelic medicine and that whole area and longevity medicine is that it has its basis in the mind-body connection, in the fact, which is definitely a fact, we've known it for many, many decades, that stress is bad for you. Essentially that the calmer you are, the better. People often say, they say, like, let's study extremely old people, centenarians, people who live more than 100, and let's figure out what they've got in common. That'll tell us everything we need to know. And it's not been very useful, because it turns out they don't have very much in common. Some of them are overweight, some of them smoke. It's hard to pick a commonality, but there's one commonality that is really strong, and that is nothing bothers them. They haven't necessarily had particularly stress-free lives in an objective sense, but when they're in a stressful situation, they handle it. They let it roll over them, right? They let it roll off them. And we understand at the level of particular hormones, for example, like cortisol, that how this works mechanistically. Of course, we don't understand the details, but we understand a fair amount about why stress is bad for you physiologically. So, coming back to the question of psychedelic medicine in general, well, a lot of it is about calmness. It's about loss of stress. I am not an expert in this field, wouldn't even remotely pretend to be. So I wouldn't want to go into further detail than that, but that's enough to explain the connection.
What do you personally do to manage stress?
I'm an extraordinarily privileged individual in terms of stress. I have been able to do in my life exactly what I set out to do. When I was a young kid, I decided I wanted to change the world, and here I am, and I'm changing the fucking world, right? So, and I get a hell of a lot of positive feedback, people people come up to me in the street to ask my autograph. I mean, I have everything that you could ever want to not have stress in the first place, even though, I do a lot of things that are physically stressful. I'm constantly on long-distance flights, things like that. But yeah, psychologically, I'm the least stressed out person that could be because of the privilege that I have. The people I look up to the most in my community are the foot soldiers. Nobody comes up to them for their autographs, but they work every bit as hard as me. They are every bit as committed, and maybe they have more stress than me, right? Even though they don't get on so many long-distance flights. So I'm the wrong person to ask about what to do about stress. Then again, though, I mean, of course, there are some things. I have a hot tub. I stare at the sky from it a lot. And I definitely find that it helps me, it recharges me, things like that. Everyone's got their own thing. Meditation, yoga, whatever. I don't do any of them. I don't need to. I just stare at the sky from my hot tub.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
The single thing that I'd like to share that is most timely is something called the Dublin Longevity Declaration. So, Dublin, because I kind of soft-launched it at our most recent conference. We run a conference every year in Dublin, in Ireland. But it's the Longevity Declaration. What it is a statement of the feasibility of doing something serious about aging medically in the foreseeable future. It's a pretty optimistic statement. And the key thing is it is signed by the large majority of the luminaries in the biology of aging worldwide. That's the critical thing. I've been going out saying for 20 years, on stage and on camera, that aging is a medical problem that we are within striking distance of solving. But nobody believes a word that I say unless my colleagues, with just as many letters after their names, say the same thing, at least most of them. And that's never been true until now, but it is true now. So I encourage everyone to go to dublinlongevitydeclaration.org and have a look. And the thing is, it's not just the luminaries. The luminaries are the top 100 or so, and then there's anybody else. You can all sign up. Of course, the goal here is both of those things. It's to show that that the declaration has expert authority, but it's also to show that it has general support. So the more signatures we get, the better.
Dr. de Grey's work is a testament to the power of innovation in science. His dedication to solving aging challenges gives us hope for a future where longer, healthier lives are possible. Thank you, Dr. de Grey, for sharing your groundbreaking vision with us today. See you on the next Elixir session, where we uncover unconventional wellness leaders doing amazing things.